As large companies do, we embarked on a sort of rewrite for a good chunk of our backend code. And so our team has been kind of coming up with patterns for that and implementing them and kind of weaving them through our existing code. So with that said, here's a little bit of a disclaimer. It is not a perfectly ordered list of things. These are just things to consider, so don't think that number 0 is more important than number 5. I think they're all equally important in the grand scheme of things. I just hope maybe you consider each of them before you embark on this journey. So, everyone has large amounts of tech debt. I think this is an important thing to say for students particularly who you might have not had an internship yet or just had a couple and you're like, oh gosh, there's like a lot of tech debt over here, like no one's doing anything about it, and like, is that bad? Like, should I be worried? Like, what? Does everyone have this? What's going on? Everyone has this. It's everywhere. Okay? I was talking to my dad a couple weeks ago at Christmas. He found a header file in debugging that was written in 1988 that they still use in their builds for some of the thermostat software that they write. It's everywhere. He tracked this bug and was like, I literally can't change this because I don't know what other load-bearing bugs I might like unleash if I change this. So I'm gonna change the one line and I'm gonna move on. And he's been programming since 1980. So, you know, it's been a while. Companies that have been around for 6 months have an insane amount of tech debt. You'd be surprised. The idea is you're building quickly. You're trying to ship a product. So you build up a ton of tech debt, and that's okay. I'm telling you, it's okay. You're gonna be all right. Sure, it can be really scary, and you can have a deep amount of discomfort about it when you're looking at it. Take a deep breath. It's going to be all right. Yeah, it's going to be okay. So only touch it when the benefits, the potential benefits, decisively outweigh the risks of you touching it. Might make you deeply uncomfortable to do that, but trust me, that is the right decision. With that said, code is not inherently bad. And what I mean by that is that sometimes, even myself, I look at code I wrote like 6 months ago and I'm like, ooh, who wrote this? This is like gnarly. And then I look at the Git brain and it was me. And I'm like, oh, well, okay then. It just might not look awesome in the current context. And I think it's important to take the time to acknowledge that when you land on that code, because it's doing its job, it's just maybe not doing its job as well as it possibly could be. So it's like not living its best life, right? Like it's living life, it's going through, it's paying bills, it's going to work, but it's maybe not living its best life in that current context. You know some people who like leave university and then like go live their lives as like adults with jobs, but like somehow feel like they're still in university? That's the context. The context changed, but they're still doing their job. They're still doing the thing. Maybe the person that wrote it, sure, they didn't think it was the best code ever written, but they didn't also set out to intentionally write bad code, right? So you have to come to it with that sort of mindset. So I hadn't written JavaScript in a hell of a long time before I wrote this talk, because I spent my day writing Hacklang, which is like some weird Facebook-flavored PHP thing, something. So this took a while, but then I was like, oh, JavaScript is like much more approachable than Hacklang. So I don't spend a stupid amount of money on lattes, but I do spend a significant amount of money on lattes. So this is my example. Typically, we can figure out what it does in a few different ways, right? So we could figure out if there's any top-level documentation for it. We could read through it, find a bit more about what it does. We don't have that here. We could also locate any tests that are associated with the function, and then run those tests, kind of read through them, figure out what they're testing. We also don't have that in this case. Welcome to legacy code. So from the name, we can assume that the function does something to calculate the amount of money we spent on lattes. The variable names are actually weirdly helpful here, so that's cool. We'll be operating on a set of latte prices, maybe using an average for some reason, maybe removing some outliers for some other strange reason. But if we first check, so it looks like we first check to remove outliers, and then we do some questionable logic to remove outliers. And then it looks like we're summing up all of the latte prices, and then maybe returning an average if we want that, and then maybe not if we don't want that. But we can test a few of our assumptions, right, by just writing a quick sample of quick tests alongside and see what that does. So we can write maybe something like this. It's quick, it's easy. It gets us familiar with the code that we're looking at and trying to understand. I don't know how much a Timmy's latte is anymore. I've been living out of the country for too long. So we've tested out the code, right, and now we're back at our solution. And we acknowledge that it does, in fact, total up the amount of money you've spent on lattes when you provided a set of data. But we don't typically end up writing new functions with Boolean arguments from the get-go, right? That's not a thing that you normally see. Normally we want to create two separate functions that handle the distinct logic, and then maybe a small set of sum functions to help you handle all the duplicative logic that ends up in between there. So if you see a function with a Boolean argument, I bet you that was added later, and you can go through the Git history and find where it was added, because that was not intended to be there. Here we have two cases of this, so we have use average and we have remove outliers. So you can actually imagine in a world a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, that money spent on lattes was probably just lines 16 through 18 and probably looked like this. So you do a little bit of like code archaeology. So we're like Indiana Jones a little bit. And I do want to take a second to reframe legacy code. So one thing that we do at work is we've started calling legacy code legendary code. And it's a bunch of principal engineers who are like, well, this code got us here, right? Like, it got us to a place where now we're a publicly traded company, and we're like important or whatever, and like people pay us money for this product, and we have somewhat reasonable uptime. Like, this code is legendary. Like, it did great things for us. It is no longer necessary now. It's kind of like the Batman, you know? Like, he's the hero we need, not the one we deserve, or the other way around, something like that. Anyway. Legendary code. Think of it as legendary code. It got you somewhere. It got you to where you are today. That's important. Don't do it if there are no tests. Please promise me you will never refactor something unless there are tests. You might have to write those tests. Okay, but please write the tests first. You probably all know tests are important. They're probably the most boring part of school if you have a testing class at all. You probably go into your internships and you're like, oh, I gotta write tests and this PR and like whatever. They're really important. I like cannot underplay, like overemphasize how important they totally are. They help us assert that any changes we're making haven't actually changed the behavior of the code, and you want to be sure of that. In the case where like my dad was looking at the header file from a million years ago, like there are no tests to assert that like he did not trigger some sort of weird path that he did not intend to trigger. There's none of that, and so like it's much riskier to do that, much safer to just do the safe thing and move on. We might just accidentally introduce new behavior, and we don't want to do that. So we wrote some tests. I mean, you turn this into real tests, and then like have them run as part of your CI, hopefully, and then, you know, it'll be okay. Real tests, somewhat. I kind of faked this a little bit. All right, a note about fixing bugs while refactoring. You might be wondering, what if we find bugs while we're refactoring? Cool, great, you found a bug, good job. Should you fix it? No, you should not fix it. The idea here is like, it depends, but I would err on the side of do not fix it. So I would say write tests that assert the correct behavior. Don't make them run. Merge those tests in, then make the bug fix before you've refactored anything. Because you want to be sure that you're asserting the change, that you're asserting the same behavior exists before and after your refactor. If you're bundling bug fixes with your refactor, you won't be certain of that anymore, and you might open yourself up to introducing even more new, strange, befangled behavior. So take the bad current implementation, bad, fix the bug there. It might be the weirdest bug fix you've ever written. Make some tests that assert that behavior, merge that, then go back and refactor. You'll have a much easier time doing that. Only start if you have time to finish. Half-finished refactors are 20 times worse than simply keeping the old code around. Imagine seeing two versions of the same thing. Which one do you use? Who are you going to ask about which one to use? Do you just go into the general channel and say, hey guys, which one do I use? I mean, some people do that, and that's fine. But it's way more confusing for anyone else onboarding onto that code base than if you had just left it alone. So here we end up potentially confusing folks who came across both implementations. So we started at an attempt to make an average money spent on lattes function and split that out from the just general money spent on lattes function with that Boolean argument. Which one do you use, right? That's just confusing. Which one are we moving to from what's going on? This is worse than just having the one with the Boolean argument at the beginning, because if you just left it there, no one's going to come back and clean that up. That's going to stay there for the next 6 to 10 years. Match the surrounding code. Using all of the newest, hippest language features is maybe not the best idea. And the reason that I say that is because it's also related to the whole don't leave it half-finished situation. So let's look at this example. In this example, there's another hint that the Boolean arguments were actually added later, because you notice the difference in syntax between the anonymous functions enclosed in the remove outliers if statement. That within the reduce call, they use all of the newfangled lambda syntax. And then later on, they use actual anonymous function syntax. So that's a hint that probably remove outliers was added later as well. That's confusing for anyone who's new onboarding onto the code base, because they don't know which syntax they should be using. They don't know, is one better than the other? Is one more performant than the other? What should I be doing? It goes all back to the same idea. So money spent on lattes really just got more confusing over time. It didn't start off being bad. And this would be equally strange, right? So we want to make sure that the function is consistent throughout so that readers who come across it just aren't confused about stylistic choices, and they can really focus on understanding the meat of what it does rather than worry about, okay, what does this flat do? Don't do it because you just happen to be there. So I like to call this the drive-by refactorer. It is someone who is on a journey to build a feature or fix a bug, and they refactor everything in their path. Whether it takes them through code that their team owns or the other team owns, it doesn't matter. They think they have the answer to it all and will rewrite the code to be better. Don't do that. Especially if your team does not own that code, you are doing a disservice to everyone else on that team. And you're breaking the boundary of trust. Because you should have had that conversation with that other team about what their decision-making was around that code that they wrote. And if they get called in the middle of the night because you inadvertently broke something in your refactoring journey through their code, and they open up the code to look at it and see what the problem is, and it doesn't look anything like they last remember it looking like, that's a horrible, horrible experience. And that incident lasts an extra 3 hours. And with that, I will open it up to questions.